Thanks for joining us on Not Boring CEs, where we don't think you should be bored to death while getting your continuing ed. Keep listening here, then hop over to notboringces.com to get all your online CE credits. All right, y'all, let's get to learning. Ann Robinson, pronouns she, her, is a licensed clinical social worker, teacher, supervisor, and super fun to be around. She has been working in the field of social work and public health since 2004 and is still going strong. Ann has expertise in trauma-informed care, supporting work with youth and their families, and navigating large systems like K-12 public schools, child welfare, and juvenile probationary systems. Ann lives for a good challenge and loves to consult on challenging cases and identify non-traditional supportive solutions. Ann is passionate about supporting clinicians in preserving their secret sauce and not burning out in the field. Ann has come close to cashing in her chips and working at a coffee shop too many times to underestimate the importance of having a life that is not consumed by your work. When not working, Ann can be found gardening, hanging with her friends and family, reading good or not good, escapist fiction, or watching live music in the summertime. Welcome, Ann. Welcome back to Not Boring CEs. I'm here with Ann Robinson, and we're going to talk about how to unlock your supervision superpowers. If you're a supervisor out there or somebody who is interested in becoming a supervisor, Ann is like the go-to. Like, I love talking to Ann about supervision because she always has a lot of really good, important things to say and has a lot of supervisees and has over the course of her supervision career. So thank you for being here, Ann.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is definitely a topic I feel super passionately about. One, because it's something I really enjoy, but more than that, I know what it feels like to have a really crappy supervisor.
Mm-hmm.
And I would imagine most people can relate to that experience at some point in their career. Yeah. And I think it's a charge for all of us to figure out how we can do things differently, because when supervision is good, it is so good. Right? It feels so good. It feels so rejuvenating. It's one of the few things that we can do as clinicians to prevent burnout in our field, is in connecting with folks that help us problem solve, help us feel inspired, help us make sense of the work that we do every day.
Mm-hmm. So is it fair to say that this is also for like clinical consultation, not just get your
100%.
license supervision? Awesome.
100%. Yeah, definitely.
Right. So when I think of supervision, like good supervision, I think about feedback. All the best supervision I ever had involved a lot of feedback. All the bad supervision I ever had basically had none. So can we talk about the role of feedback, how to integrate that as a supervisor, the things that get in our way with providing feedback, all of it?
Yeah, so I think as supervisors, the thing that prevents us from soliciting feedback is fear and imposter syndrome, right? We're afraid of what people are going to say, or we're afraid of our skills and how that's being reflected. And so we're cautious to solicit feedback if we think it's going to be negative. There's also a one down approach when it comes to soliciting feedback from your supervisees, where it's kind of an opportunity for us to say, like, hey, is this working for you? Is this what you're looking for? How can we make sure that this time feels really meaningful for you? And that is an invitation for folks to say, like, actually, this is not working for me. And I would love to talk about why, or I'd love to talk about what would work for me. And that can hurt our feelers, right? If we think that we're showing up and giving 100%. It's also a really blunt reflection if we know that we're not showing up with 100%, right? If we are not giving our A game, then why would I ask someone to score me? Right. And so if we're, as supervisors, consistently integrating feedback into our sessions, so maybe not every time we meet with someone, but every month or every other month, we're soliciting feedback from someone, we know that we need to be performing in a way that we're going to get feedback that feels meaningful, right? It's just like what we're asking our supervisees to do. I think didactic feedback is one of the biggest things that you can do to build trust in your supervisee relationship. And I'm sorry, I've got a whiny dog.
It's okay.
Pause and just let her out for a second. So I know Zoom does a really good job of muting noises outside,
Uh-huh.
but like I can hear her. So it's distracting me. Uh, so as I was saying, didactic feedback is one of the greatest things that we can do to build a trusting relationship in our supervision with folks. And so we have to show up and be willing to hear what people have to say.
Yeah.
And so that is not just in like, where are your skills and how are you feeling about your skill building? What would you like to focus on moving forward? But how are you feeling about the feedback that I'm giving you or the insights that I'm offering? Or one of the questions that I ask folks multiple times every time we meet with supervision is, how is that sitting for you?
Mhm.
Right? Or what are your thoughts on that when I'm offering someone feedback on something that they just shared with me? And I genuinely like want to hear what they have to say
Mhm.
because there's not a supervisor on this planet that knows the answer to everything.
Right. Right. And it might vary from supervisee to supervisee as well. Like it might not be
Should.
aligned for the person sitting next to you, but it might be
That's
like
right.
exactly what your other supervisee needed to hear.
That's right. And so that's my practice for soliciting super feedback in individual supervision. In like group settings or group supervision, I will do a little bit more formal feedback solicitation, typically quarterly, right? So if I'm meeting with my groups once a month, every quarter, I will send them a survey that says, how is this squaring for you? What what are you feeling is useful in our time together? What would you like to see more of? What are some topics you'd like to spend more time thinking about or talking about in future sessions? And I carve out time in our group meeting for people to do that, right? So because it is their space and I want them to feel responsible or like they can contribute to how meaningful this space is for them. So it's not something I'm just sending them like flippantly by email, like when you get a chance, I know you're really busy, if you feel like it. It's like, no, this is part of what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And by making space for and making time for formalized feedback, it communicates to people that what they have to say matters.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I think about some of the people that I've worked with who have been in bad supervision relationships where they feel like if they gave feedback, they would be penalized.
Mm-hmm.
Those, I would think that those supervisors are probably not asking for feedback.
I would guarantee they're not asking for feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And if they are, it's one of those like, let me know if you have any issues. Moving on.
Right.
Right. It's not, um, that's why people are feeling like they're going to get retaliated against or that their supervisor doesn't care, is because they're not creating a container for feedback to feel meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
We can feel the difference.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like I think about like I love your point of like if you're going to be soliciting feedback, like do the things that are going to
Yeah.
get you good feedback.
That's right.
And how like the supervisors I had who very openly asked,
Mm-hmm.
I felt very safe being
Mm-hmm.
honest. Now there's a people pleaser inside me
Of course.
that like I had to grapple with and often just won out,
Mm-hmm.
honestly.
Mm-hmm.
But I think creating like that was a me problem, not a them
Mm-hmm.
problem. And creating that safe space allows the supervisor to improve their skills in supervision, allows the relationship to feel safer, allows the supervisee to get more of what they need. Like there is no downside.
No, and even when you're suspecting, right? Because of course I have those supervisee relationships as well, where I'm like, I'm not sure they would tell me if they disagreed with me,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's then a charge and an opportunity for me to come at it from a different angle,
Yeah.
right? Or to say, when I'm soliciting someone for feedback and they're like, oh, yeah, this is great. This is exactly what I'm looking for. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for our time together, right? And we're doing that whole like dance.
Mm-hmm.
And I can say to them, like, it's okay if you disagree with me, right?
Yeah.
Like that is, and if you don't disagree with me right now, I invite you to disagree with me in the future.
Mm-hmm. There's such a parallel process to therapy, right?
Mhm. And that's why I get or this is why I feel so passionately about kind of boosting people up and encouraging them to consider supervision in their practice, because all of the qualities that make you a good clinician or make you a good mental health specialist or whatever work that you're doing are the things that make you a good supervisor. You show up, you're consistent, you're predictable with your expectations, you know your strengths. You're not afraid to refer out or ask questions or answer questions with an I don't know, let's figure it out,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're curious about how the other person is doing. Like, this is what makes you a good social worker, counselor, psychologist. And this is what would make you a good supervisor as well.
Mm-hmm. I think in my mind is like supervision is often, at least the way I've done it or experienced it, more direct than
Mm-hmm.
therapy is.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's still, even if you're not a very directive therapist, you're still hopefully calling your clients on some of their stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
how how do you help people make that shift as supervisors or new supervisors to being just like putting it out there a little bit more? How do you help them manage
Yeah.
that anxiety that comes up?
Yeah. So I think the responsibility is different, right? When
Mhm.
you're working with someone as a client or as a patient, them figuring out this process is part of it, right? And
Mhm.
that is a parallel process for supervisees as well, or for being a supervisor. And your responsibility as a supervisor is a little bit different in that if you are letting your supervisee like fumble through, or you're letting yourself as a supervisor kind of fumble through excessively or extensively, like that has great implications on their client care,
Mhm.
right? And so I like to think about it as far as like clarity is kindness, right? And so if I'm seeing something, I'm going to say something. If I'm
Mhm.
curious about something, I'm going to ask about something. If I'm concerned about something, you can trust that I'm going to say something,
Mhm.
right? Because that is the ambiguity that happens there of like, it's the same thing that causes or can contribute to mistrust in the therapeutic relationship, of this feeling like I feel like you know the answers and you're not telling them to me.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right. And as a supervisor, there's less of a responsibility to let someone kind of figure it out on their own. And it's
Mhm.
more like, let's treat it as more of like a Q&A, right?
Yeah.
You're asking my opinion, I'm going to give you my opinion. Sometimes I might ask you like, I don't, what are your thoughts on it? Right? Because I want to hear what you have to say. And if my thoughts are the same or different, I'll share that with you too.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think about the from the perspective of the client slash the perspective of the supervisee,
Mhm.
there's a different kind of expectation of what you're looking at this person in this position of power, essentially.
Right.
Like how they engage with you is going to be different.
Hmm.
Um, and I think there's a handling with kid glove situation that can happen
Yeah,
sometimes
for sure.
that might be appropriate for a client going through a hard time that
Yes,
is not necessarily appropriate when you're helping shape and mold somebody's clinical practice.
that's exactly right. If you're using kid gloves with your supervisee, you're contributing to and breeding more anxiety, right?
Say more about that.
Yeah. So I think, again, if I'm coming to someone for supervision and I say, like, hey, this is one of my clients, or this is a situation I'm working with, I'm really concerned, or I'm really stumped, or I feel really worried that I'm, allowing things to continue that aren't healthy, or whatever the concern is that someone's bringing to the table,
Mhm.
and you were to say like, I wonder what that brings up for you, right? Which could be a very reasonable reflection to do in therapy. As a supervisee, it's like, no, I need someone to join me in this right now and to help me process through, right?
Mhm.
And so if someone is simply, and reflective supervision is a form of supervision, it is an important aspect to the supervision relationship. And one of the things that you figure out as a supervisor through practice and time is, when is reflection the appropriate intervention and when is direction the appropriate intervention. And I would
Mhm.
say that parallels the therapeutic relationship too.
Right, right. I would think though the ratio is different.
It is, right? It's almost like
Uh-huh.
inverse, right? It's
Uh-huh.
like an inverse proportion. But similarly, of like, we all have clients who come to us and say, I wish my last therapist had told me X, Y, or Z, or I wish that we like inherit a case or a situation and someone says to you, like, I didn't realize that this was abusive, or I didn't realize that this was unsafe. And I come from the school of thought where if I have a client who's engaging in behavior that's unsafe, it's important for me to name that,
Hmm.
right? It's important for me to stay curious with it, but it's also really relevant for me to state my concerns.
Hmm.
It's part of why they're bringing it to therapy is they want that feedback loop, right? Like,
Right.
is this okay? Is this not okay? Um, and so, yeah, I would agree with you in that while that happens in the therapeutic relationship, it's an inverse proportion in the supervision relationship.
Hmm. Yeah. I'm thinking too about how so many of us, our first experience with supervision is maybe in a practicum or an internship, and it's with, you know, a supervisor at the place that we're currently working, and they're
Yeah,
tired and they're burned
yeah,
out. And
yeah,
we kind of go and we both do our time in the room together,
that's
essentially.
right.
Like it's not, at least my experience in those phases of my life, not always very, doesn't yield a lot of learning or a lot of support.
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of people that continues on in your work, if you continue to work at that organization or a similar one, and you're just kind of assigned a supervisor.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and if that sets the stage for how we show up to supervision as supervisees,
Mm-hmm.
we don't always know how to use supervision effectively when we find a great
Yeah,
supervisor.
that's
How
right.
can like supervisors teach us how to
Mm-hmm.
use supervision well?
Yeah. So I think it's part of our responsibility to teach people how to use supervision well, just like we teach people how to use therapy well. And initially, when you're first building a relationship with someone, I find it to be really helpful to have your first few supervision sessions be highly structured. So whether they're focused on, I've got like a skills assessment that I send people initially where they can self-assess on a Likert scale, like where they see their skills lying, where they want support, what they're interested in, kind of across the lifespan. And so I'll start with that. And then we review that skills assessment together. And I say, hey, okay, so based on this, it would tell me that like these are 3 or 4 things that would be really helpful for us as far as skill building to work on in supervision. And I also will outline supervision can consist of case consultation, ethical dilemmas, professional development, curiosities around the field. Like it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to just be case consultation,
Mhm.
right? Which can be really hard for a new supervisee where they're like, I don't know what questions to ask about these cases yet. And I don't
Mhm.
want to show up and ask stupid questions because I don't want my supervisor to not think that I'm good at my job.
Right.
And so when we acknowledge that that fear is there, whether verbally or just implicitly by providing more structure to our sessions, right? Whether it's through surveys, whether it's through materials, and like, I want you to listen to this podcast or I want you to read this article, and I would love to talk about it the next time we meet for supervision,
Mhm.
right? That's really relevant, especially in agency settings where oftentimes there's like more of a concentrated demographic that you're serving. So if we're working, if I'm working in an agency that supports families and does lots of family therapy, that would give me a whole host of resources that I could share with my supervisees
Mhm.
and give them something to talk about, as well as something then to practice and implement in their next sessions, to come back, then to report in their next supervision session. So this is how we build skills without saying like, well, how are you doing family therapy? Right? Because
Mhm.
that automatically puts someone who's a new supervisee in a state of panic because
Yeah.
people pleaser or not, they want their supervisors to feel like they're competent and they're capable and they're dedicated to their work.
Absolutely. And I think about like, newer clinicians, I mean, or just people kind of wired to hold more
Hmm.
shame than others and who really feel
Hmm.
like they want to present well in all ways,
Right.
and how that can get in the way of learning when you're like, no, things are great with all my cases. Everybody's progressing as expected. You know, I never feel out of my element or like I don't know what to say or do.
Right.
How when you have something structured that can really help
Mhm.
pull out those things without being like, no, really, but where do you feel incompetent? Because I know you do, because we all do still.
We all do, no matter where we are in our practice, right? And so, yeah, it really like levels the playing field of just assuming that someone would benefit from learning or talking about something regardless of their experience,
Mm-hmm.
right? If I was working with a supervisor and she offered me a resource to review or a training to take and then to come back and talk about it in our next supervision, like that would be a lovely next step for me, because
Mm-hmm.
not only did I know that this skill or this resource was important to the supervisor, or she felt it would be valuable for my learning, but it also gives me kind of a jumping off point and a lens at which to look through my cases. So I was listening to this podcast and it made me think about this case that I haven't spoken with you about yet. And I'd be really curious about your thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we can use that as like as a bouncing off point.
Yeah. I think about that, like how to use supervision effectively when we come at it from the stage of like, it's just hoops we have to jump through until we can
Mm-hmm.
get our license.
Yeah.
Um, we miss out on really creating incredible clinical skills and incredible
Yeah.
competence and
Yeah.
confidence
Yeah.
that if we're going into it like this is my place to learn, like this is my school right now,
Mm-hmm.
is every
Mm-hmm.
week or every month or whatever the frequency is,
Frequency. Yeah.
this is like this is where I get to like absorb and suck up all the information that I want,
Yeah.
with
And
the
make sure, yeah, and make sure that I like don't turn into one of those therapists that other therapists talk about because they do
right,
stupid shit. Right.
right, or the one that clients say like, well, yeah, my last therapist was really nice. Like I'm like, oh God,
Hmm.
that would be the worst thing a client could say about me. I
Yeah.
mean, because that
Right.
they wouldn't say anything worse than that, I don't think, but like nice doesn't move you forward in life. Like,
No, nice isn't like a meaningful space to be in clinically.
right.
Right. And so, just like with our clients in therapy, if they're brand new to therapy, we're going to show up as therapists and expect to do a little bit more work,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not always the phrase that we often weaponize in clinical spaces is like, you can't do more work than your client.
Right.
And I appreciate that. I think that's really important. I also think initially it would make sense if we do a little bit more work than our client, as long
Mm-hmm.
as then we're backing off and sharing the responsibility, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like I'm going to walk, I'm going to hold your hand, and then I'm going to let go of your hand, and you're going to do it and let me know where we're going to go next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in supervision, it's the same.
Right. And so you're talking about starting off structured and then at some point the structure falls away
Yeah.
or decreases.
Depending
Mm-hmm.
again on the person, right? Like there's some people who really like find safety and comfort in the structure, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think at that point, if I was meeting with someone, let's say for like 6 months, and they're still like, what resource should I read next, right? What podcast should I listen to next? This might be where I hand the responsibility over to them and say,
Mm-hmm.
like, I would love for you to find a resource that you feel is meaningful for your work right now and share it with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm thinking about like the first really great supervisor I ever had. Shout
Yeah.
out to Donna Thompson. And she was very structured.
Yeah.
And like I had a form I had to fill out before I came
Yeah.
in every time. And this is how I work in all areas of my life is I'm not great at setting aside time to think about things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just real big on like doing things constantly and just
Mm-hmm.
having this thing I had to fill out
Yeah.
so that there was some deeper thought, some intentionality, some like reflection essentially on
Mm-hmm.
what had gone on in the last week clinically and how I
Yeah.
felt about that. And um, I hated it, but I also
Mm-hmm.
knew at the same time it was so good for me because I am just wired slash I keep encouraging myself to go, go, go and have my whole life. And I'm not great at making time for reflection. So just thinking about how beneficial that can be for clients or supervisees rather, who are always just doing that
Yeah, right.
space
It
to
doesn't.
think, forcing space to think. Is really
Hmm.
helpful and was juicy. Like I learned so much working with her.
Yeah.
And really appreciated her guidance and her she was great at both giving and getting feedback too. So going back to the
Mm-hmm.
whole feedback piece. Um, she didn't handle me with any kid gloves and didn't expect to
Yeah.
be handled with kid gloves either.
Right. She trusted that you could take it, or she trusted that you could give her the feedback that like it's too much, right?
Mhm.
I need you to soften up a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, which is just indicative of both where someone is in their professional process as well as how they integrate feedback, right? If we have someone who's
Mhm.
never had professional feedback before and you come in hot and you're like, your documentation is shit. And I'm really not seeing a lot of reflection of like case conceptualization here. And I'm not tying in how your sessions are leading back to your treatment plan. I'm thinking about like agency based supervision. You
Mhm.
know, that's a lot for someone to take on initially. After working together for a year, you know, and someone says to you like, what are you doing here? Like
Mhm.
I'm not able to conceptualize what's happening with your case in this situation. uh, that's going to feel a little bit differently.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so interesting the similarities and differences with clinical work. I mean, it makes sense because we're
Yeah,
all humans, right? And we're
that's
dealing with
right.
emotions and some more directly than others with supervision, but um and you know, we all want to feel good. We want to feel like we're doing a good job and can
Yeah,
improve.
right. We
Um
want to scaffold,
mhm.
right? And remembering we work in a soft science, so there's no completion or perfection that's attainable,
Right.
right? And
I
so we
love
have
that.
to
Oh, say it again.
we work in a soft science. There's no completion or perfection that's attainable. We just have to keep working the same muscles over and over and over again, right?
Mhm.
And we find new ways to work them, and we strengthen certain ones. Uh, and when we normalize that process, right, of like everyone benefits from supervision always.
Mhm.
This
Yeah.
is not a means to an end. This is not a like a one and done. This is not just because it's a job requirement or a licensure requirement. It's because when we practice in isolation, we put our clients at risk.
Mm. Yeah. And so I think about how that lends to making sure that we're doing some clinical consultation post
Yeah,
supervision. And it doesn't necessarily have to be as frequent or as in depth necessarily, but making sure that it's not just the CEs that we need to get, you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
but it's also and I love that some licenses consider clinical consultation as a CE. I wish that more of
Mm-hmm,
them did. I wish mine did.
mm-hmm,
But I think that seeking that out, being willing to pay for it because it is an
mm-hmm.
investment in your clinical skills and your business and your clients. Um, Making that a priority so that you can continue to also stay interested in what we do
Totally.
because we can get real complacent.
We can get really complacent, and that's also an indicator of burnout, right?
Mhm.
And I think oftentimes too, when we practice in isolation, we do have this fear, like this litigious fear in the back of our minds of like, oh, this will never happen, but what if, right? Or oh, I
Mhm.
will never get sued, but what happens if, right? And when you're in consultation as an independent practitioner, uh, it gives you the chance. Like every time I meet with my supervisor, I update my case notes for the clients that we discussed, and I say, you know, talked about this client in consultation. This was the recommendation, or this is what I was advised to do. We'll consider for future sessions, right? It acts as a safeguard for me in demonstrating when I'm working with clients who are presenting with an element of acuity, which most clients are, or
Mm-hmm.
could be if we're like in a courtroom about it. It gives me an element of protection and demonstrating that I'm seeking support and I'm
Mm-hmm.
seeking the advisement of other therapists on how to best support this client so that I can both acknowledge and address the acuity that's presenting.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. It's a good like cover your competency kind of
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And like you said, like if we're not going to get any better on our
No,
own. Like that's
no.
not how that works.
Right. We're not going to get any better on our own. We learn best. I think like online platforms, recorded webinars are so helpful for planting seeds, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're so helpful for getting our wheels turning and getting curiosity happening. But how we learn to apply new skills is in community and in the process of it all, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where I can try and get feedback. I can I can implement and I can ask questions,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's something to having a community or having a person that really speaks to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the cool thing about getting consultation or supervision after you're licensed is that you can do it with anyone anywhere, right? Like my supervisor is in a completely different state, but she has skills and training in areas that I don't and that I want to learn from.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't need to be concerned about like her license and my license and not working for my licensing board and all of those things. It really opens up what spaces are available to us.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love how like it trickles down so
Mm-hmm.
beautifully to our clients,
Mm-hmm.
to our business.
Mm-hmm.
If we're in private practice, it's not just, you know, the better clinical work you do, the more clients are going to hear about that and want to come, you know?
Right.
So it's good for building your practice if that's something you're looking for. It's not enough to get it off the ground. Unfortunately, for those of you who are like, oh, maybe, maybe that's all I have to do is just be great. But it's great for maintaining a
Yeah.
practice
Yeah.
and your clients only benefit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the reality is when I'm asked to take a new client and I don't have space, the first people I go to are the people I supervise
Right. Because you know
because
their
I know
work
their
so well.
practice,
Yeah.
right? I know what they're
Yeah.
good at. I know what, like, I know how they practice. I trust their practice, right?
Hmm.
And so if you're in a, especially in a group consultation space, like that's a beautiful networking opportunity that I think is so underlooked. Because
Hmm.
again, not only do I go to the people that are in my consultation space, but everybody else in the consultation space goes to those people too. So
Hmm.
if you are building a practice, like that is definitely an untapped resource
Yeah,
for most
absolutely.
people.
Yeah. So I think about, we've talked about like being a new clinician and all the
Mm-hmm.
nervousness that comes with that. I think about the first time I was a supervisor and feeling very like, you know, I had to take CEs to become a supervisor and I had
Yeah.
to, you know, jump through some hoops, but I was like, is that it? Like now I'm apparently able to be
Launched.
responsible. Yeah. It's kind of like when I had my baby, I'm like, I just get to take this home. Like that's what happens now.
Right.
And so I think about like the imposter syndrome that I felt. I definitely wasn't going into these supervision relationships feeling like, yes, now I know what I'm doing and I shall
Mm.
impart it upon you.
Right.
So, like, how do we as new supervisors deal with that imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think remembering that just like being a new clinician, what people appreciate about their supervision with you is not that you're an encyclopedia of knowledge, right?
Hmm.
And you are an encyclopedia of knowledge at that point. But people are not coming to you asking for you to have the answers for everything. They're asking for a different perspective. They're asking for your experience. They're asking for your relationship and your connection. They're asking for you to be curious, compassionate, kind. They're asking for, they're asking to know they're not alone. right? And that
Mhm.
you can do. Like, I confidently believe that most people can do that. I feel for people in agency settings where becoming a supervisor is really your only promotion option, right?
Mhm.
It's also your only way of decreasing your caseload. It's the only way that you can gain some predictability in your schedule. It's it's not necessarily something that people get to skill build into. They get matriculated into, right?
Mhm.
Where it's like, okay, you've been here for 2 years, it's time to become a supervisor. Um, or you've been here long enough, we've got an opening for a supervisor position, like let's do that now.
Mhm.
um and so I feel for those folks because it's not necessarily like I'm interested in doing this, it's that I'm less interested in continuing doing what I'm doing now.
Mhm. Yeah.
um and I think the challenge comes for those folks of saying like, this, I need to resource myself in different ways. And if I'm matriculating into the supervisor position, it's probably coming with some secondary trauma and some burnout from my direct service position.
Mhm.
And that I need to address, right? That's my responsibility instead of perpetuating like a trauma bonding environment in my agency or in my workplace. It's saying like, what kind of supervision would have prevented me from feeling the secondary trauma that I'm feeling
Oh,
right
I
now?
love that. Yes.
Right. And
Mhm.
when we really, I mean, I think, I just had like a group supervision session last night and our topic was grief and loss. And I don't know about you, but like I hate working with grief.
Yes.
It And also grief is a part of the human experience. So
Mhm.
like opting out of grief is not an option in my clinical
Right.
practice. But what I hate about grief, or what icks me about grief, is that it is the bluntest reflection of the work that we have or have not done on our own grief. Right?
Oh,
When we're
yep.
sitting across from someone who's actively grieving, it brings up all the things that we have not dealt with, or
Mhm.
not, or have avoided, or have dealt with and now are reminded of again. And sitting across the room from a supervisee who's really struggling does the same thing. And
Hmm.
it brings up all of those questions and those moments and those missed opportunities and those sessions that you've had with clients where you said the wrong thing and you put your foot in your mouth. And that's where our imposter syndrome like really kicks up,
Mhm.
is when we're feeling insecure around what our practice has been so far. And I think remembering that it is a didactic experience, and sometimes we can figure it out with our supervisees, right? Like,
Mhm.
this is what I'm good at. This is where these are some of the lessons that I learned that I would love to spare someone else from dealing with. These are some of the mistakes that I made early on that were totally avoidable if I had had a different relationship with my supervisor, if I had known to ask the question. And
Mhm.
so instead of kind of letting our ego take the driver's seat and saying like, oh, everybody's got to figure it out on their own and I'm not here to make this any easier for anyone else, saying like, oh no, this is my chance to
Mhm.
make this a better experience for someone else than it was for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like we've got this piece around creating a better situation for others so they don't have to suffer like we did.
Yeah.
But I also wonder about like that part of us that's like, but you don't know enough to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So like how do we quiet that voice? Or the voice that's like, you just kind of barely got here as a supervisor. How are you going to help this person who's actually pretty competent, like do
Right.
this work?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think that that mentality, and I know you and I have talked about this in different capacities before, but that mentality is what keeps us really small, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of like, I don't know enough, I'm not smart enough, I don't have enough experience, I don't work with this population directly, I can't, I won't, I need more training, I need more education. It keeps us on this hamster wheel of feeling like there's this attainable goal, but I'll never get there. Like,
Mhm.
because if we were to look at it 5 years ago, we would say, you've arrived, you've landed. But
Right.
in those past 5 years, we've pushed it again
Hmm.
beyond the horizon point, right? So Sean Acor has a like a TED talk about his book, The Happiness Advantage, that talks about kind of happiness in the workplace. And one of the things he talks about is this exact point, which is we put happiness beyond the cognitive horizon, right?
Hmm.
Of like, we're always striving, we're always pushing, we're always wanting, we're always needing one more thing. And while continuous education and professional development is so important in our journeys, we don't have to wait to be good enough to do things.
Hmm. Yeah. And when we're working on that mindset and our supervisee asks us a question that stumps us,
Mm-hmm.
I think about how much more confident I see people who respond to me with, honestly, I don't know.
That's a great question.
Yeah. I wonder where we could look to find a resource for that.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of somebody making shit up on the fly to
Mm-hmm.
save face, and we both kind of
Mm-hmm.
know it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we can smell bullshit like that, right? There's
Uh-huh.
no, I know when people are giving me an answer that they think is right enough that it's gonna like pacify me. I also know how much I respect people who are willing to say, huh, I hadn't really thought about that,
Hmm.
right? And I've supervised people, like there's one person that comes to mind in particular who is like way smarter than me, right? Like just he's
Hmm.
so bright and he's so dedicated and he's so kind of like academic and committed to clinical excellence and works with populations that I don't work with, right? Like works with people who predominantly have OCD or they are autistic or he's worked in eating disorder recovery centers and like all of these niche areas that like I don't have experience in. And
Hmm.
he knows that, right? And so sometimes people come to me with questions that are like so off the rails, right? Like, today I'd really like to talk about cyclical psychodynamic therapy. And I'm like, okay, like tell me about it, right? This is like not something that I'm not reading the same textbooks you are for fun right now. Um, and it's not about me having the answers. It's about him wanting to process through things that he doesn't have other people to talk to about.
Hmm.
And that I can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And ask good questions to go
Yeah.
deeper. And
Yeah.
absolutely.
And so that's what I see my responsibility in that supervision relationship. It's not it's not a matter of like I need to do all sorts of homework and research before I meet with him monthly so that I can anticipate whatever like off the rails question he's going to come at me with supervision. It's it's really for him, it's more about reminding him that he can be curious, but he also already has all the skills he needs to support his clients.
Hmm. Yeah. I'm thinking about like how we all have that in our friendships.
Uh-huh.
Hopefully, like we have this dynamic already in our lives.
Yeah.
But when we frame something as like supervision, like there's a
Mm-hmm.
supervisor, there's this like power dynamic and this hierarchy, and the one at the top is supposed to be all knowing and omnipotent and hyper competent and unwaveringly confident,
Yeah.
which is not real life. And we don't have
Mm-mm.
to step into this false role as supervisors. We can just trust that we can be ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
that we can also continue to learn and grow because it's kind of impossible not to when you're a supervisor.
That's right.
And to be really like real with our supervisees
Mm-hmm.
through our experience, through our knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
and through our like total cluelessness sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a beautiful opportunity as a supervisor to continue your learning in a different way too, right?
Mhm.
Because if you're finding that someone is again, kind of like you're feeling really anxious when you meet with them, or you're feeling a lot of imposter syndrome around your ability to support them, that offers a really beautiful point of reflection for you as a supervisor of
Mhm.
like, what part of me is really feeling like I need to impress this person,
Mm. Yeah.
right? And what part of that is me and like hitting on one of my weak spots or one of my, like soft belly moments, and what of that is kind of what this other person is bringing to the table, and how can I invite both of us to get curious about that?
Hmm.
Because if you have someone showing up for supervision, which I think is all of our biggest fears, showing up for supervision and they're like, okay, I've got a notepad. I want you to give me I've got 15 questions prepared and I want clear and linear answers for all 15 of them. That's how I feel like this time could be used most effectively.
Uh-huh.
Like that's our anxiety dream, right? About being a
Uh-huh.
supervisor.
Hmm.
And knowing that even if you do have someone who shows up with 15 questions and they're expecting answers to each one of them, your role as a supervisor might be to say, like, hold on a second, right? Like, what would having all of these answers mean to you?
Hmm. Right.
It doesn't mean just because the invitation, like the anxiety invitation is there, that I have to pick it up and match it.
Hmm. Yeah. And how easy it would be to fall into like, all right, shoot, what are your questions? And then to
Right.
strive to give something linear that's not linear,
Right.
and to twist yourself up as a supervisor to try
Yes.
to meet the need, which is really a want because they don't necessarily know what they need in that situation. They just think they
Yes.
do. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think there's time and space for, like, I have 4 questions, right? Because there are parts of our jobs and parts of our work that are a little bit more administrative or clerical. And like sometimes those are question and answer questions, right? Of
Hmm.
like, how many objectives do I need to have on a treatment plan? How many minutes is the 90837? How many, like whatever those have hard answers,
Hmm.
but there are some questions that like don't, and it's our responsibility to say that instead of trying to give a hard answer to a soft question.
Yeah. I think about people who are current supervisors listening, or people considering becoming supervisors, like their shoulders just like coming way down
Yeah.
from their ears. I'm like,
I hope so.
okay, to be a great supervisor, I don't have to know all the answers. I don't have to make it like, uh, put it in a little bow and make
Yeah.
it so perfect to present that,
Hmm.
just like life, the things you're going to be talking about in supervision are messy,
Yeah.
and it's going to be a lot of it depends.
Right. Or let's talk about it in this specific case. Right.
Hmm.
And like when we talk about it in this specific case, these are the things that I'm looking at that are informing my answer.
Hmm.
But these variables, if they were to shift a little bit, it would change what I would what I would advise you to do, or what I would consider doing in this case.
Yeah.
Right. Like when we pull back the curtain in general, and there there's so much value to that, right? And saying, here's
Hmm.
how I make clinical decisions. I had a
Yes.
supervisor once that drove me bonkers because every question I would ask her would come back with an answer of, that feels good or that doesn't feel good. And I'm like, what does that mean? Right? Like, I'm part of, at that point, I was just like playing with my food, right? And like trying
Uh-huh.
to make her really uncomfortable. But like, articulate what you mean. Like, I need
Mhm.
you to sign off on things. I can't make decisions based on how I think you're going to feel.
Right. Right. Yeah.
That doesn't give me enough to go on, right? I need to know why or how you're coming to this decision so that I can use that information to inform my decisions.
Hmm. Yeah. I love the idea of helping people understand how you think through things,
Mm-hmm.
because it gives them a model to try it on themselves,
That's right.
like we learn through examples. So much of our learning is through examples. And if you can just out loud as a supervisor provide that, um, it makes it less magical. Like
That's right.
you didn't
That's
just pull
right.
it out of thin air. Like, here is this
Yes,
beautiful response for that client. It's,
totally.
here are all the components that are leading me to like cobble together this response, which we'll probably need to edit a few times. Um,
Right. But
yeah.
this is how I got there.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, and that happens experientially in supervision. It also happens through examples and through scenarios. And so there's a person I'm supervising through her internship practice right now. And she works full time at our community crisis center and is doing a part-time internship in an outpatient setting. And one of the things she said to me last week in supervision was, I'm not good at letting people sit in their feelings. Right. And I laughed and I said, you don't have a lot of experience in doing that. When you work in a crisis center,
Right.
it's very much problem and solution. So it's
Mm-hmm.
not that you're not good at it, it's that you haven't tried it.
Right.
Right. And so we can sit in this feeling of, I'm not good in this. And this is a parallel experience to how you're feeling in session. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But in this situation, we're going to work through that. And we're going to sit with the discomfort of not feeling like I can meet my clients where they need to be.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
we're going to walk through it together. And then you're going to be able to use that same technique or that same formula in session with your clients when you're having that moment of like, I just want to offer them more skills. I just want to like give them, CBT worksheets. I just want to like safety plan with them. Of course you do. That's what
Mm-hmm.
you have the most experience doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it works for you really well in the context you're doing it.
Right. And this is a different setting, right? Where you're
Yeah.
still seeing people 12 weeks later. And that's
Mm-hmm.
very different than in a crisis center.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah. You'd mentioned a skills inventory that
Hmm.
you provide your supervisees when you're starting with them.
Yeah.
And I know that this is something you also encourage supervisors to do,
Yes.
is to do their own skill inventory. Can we talk about
Yes.
that?
Yeah. So I think there's so many resources again online that people can pilfer through. And that is, to be totally transparent, like I borrowed and hodgepodge things together to make something that feels meaningful for me.
Mhm.
And I think when we think about ourselves as therapists or as supervisors, we're looking at a couple of pillars of skill, right? So we're looking at administrative skill, like my ability, my knowledge of consent and disclosure and laws and regulations and regulatory statutes for my state, right? Those are things that I need to know as a supervisor and need to be competent on for the different licenses that I can supervise. And in the state that I'm like, I can supervise everybody. So I need to know like what's happening for counselors, what's happening for social workers, in order to be able to show up for them well. So that's one pillar. I think about educational or clinical support as being a second pillar. So I feel confidently in my ability to assess my supervisee's skill set and provide them with the appropriate supplemental support in order to help them get from, if we wanted to like turn this into a hard number, to get them from a 3 to a 4, right? Or
Mhm.
from a 4 to a 5 in their skills or their confidence level. I These are the areas or the topics or the types of clients that I feel really comfortable supporting people in supervision through. So again, back to like OCD and autism and eating disorders, like those are not my areas, and I disclose that to supervisees ahead of time, right? If like if they're working in a specialized niche that I don't have experience in, I will share that.
Mhm.
I think there is a lot of benefit to get from cross pollination outside of your niche as well, but supervisees get the chance to kind of make that decision on their own. I also think it's really important for us as supervisors to really like identify what we're good at, like what is our secret sauce,
Right.
right? And
Mhm.
one of my secret sauces is finding really dynamic ways to solve complex problems, right? And also really resource rich. So not just in clinical resources, but community resources or statewide resources, and really believe in kind of the brokering aspect of being a social worker. And so like connecting people to other resources and skills that will best serve them or their clients. Um, and so when we get, and to back up for a second, and so when we have that knowledge of what makes us good at our jobs, what makes us good as supervisors, it helps us more confidently build on things that maybe we're not as naturally good at,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because if we think about the components that build resiliency, professional resiliency or interpersonal resiliency, it comes with a sense of mastery, right? Like I can do hard things, or I know how to resource myself well to get hard things done. It comes with a sense of connectedness. So people like me and I like people. I'm trustworthy. People see me as trustworthy. And it comes with that sense of reactivity being low, right? So when I'm confronted with situations I don't understand, or if I'm confronted with an issue with my supervisees, I can approach that with a really level head.
Mm-hmm.
And that means when I've got that kind of foundation, it just lends itself for really good scaffolding. And
Yeah.
so if that foundation for you doesn't feel solid as a supervisor, that's the priority, right? Like, how do we spend more time with other people who are supervisors? How do we ask other supervisors what they do? How do we approach some of these questions or solutions? How do we scaffold or build foundations in our supervision sessions so that I kind of have some predictability in how this is going to go and some flow? And once those have been established, then we can get more creative. Then we can kind of like loosen up on the reins a little bit. But I can't emphasize enough how important it is to know what makes you good at your job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so in is like the skills inventory
Mm-hmm.
itself, you've got these pillars.
Mm-hmm.
What if you're really low on something?
Yeah.
Are we focusing on really like expanding the things we're super strong on and spending our energy there? Or are we trying to like get everything up a level that's not naturally something that we're already killing it with?
Yeah, I think that depends on the person and their workplace, right? Like if you're in an agency setting where supervising is part of your job and you really don't have a lot of flexibility, then we need to have like we need to cast a wide net and we're not necessarily as focused on depth. If
Right.
you're in private practice and we're doing supervision for funsies because we like it or we're interested in it, that means we can get as deep as we want and we don't necessarily need to worry about casting such a wide net.
Mm-hmm.
So it depends, like everything. But it depends on your intention, it depends on your goals, it depends on like why you're doing this, why you're
Mm-hmm.
doing supervision.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you're excited about it and it's something you are
Yeah,
choosing to do and it's not
yeah,
like just put on your job description,
that's right.
um, there's just so much more leeway to play with it. Like to choose like, oh, well, maybe this year I'm going to go hard on this one pillar or this one
Yes.
topic or this one modality. I mean, there's just like there's a freedom there where you can really follow your interest.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious how that works with supervisees. Like you're following your interest as you're educating yourself or
Yeah,
getting educated through your own supervisor. How does that end up like trickling down
trickling
to
down.
your supervisees?
I think inherently it trickles, like it has to trickle down, right? I think to your point or to your question about kind of like where our focus lies, that's inherently where we're going to focus our time and energy, both with our clients and with our supervisees. So,
Mhm.
last year I was really invested in solid and strong case conceptualization, right? Like that felt really important to me. It felt really interesting to me. It also felt a little bit like a key to unlock lots of other things, right? Of like, if I have a really good conceptualization of this person and I understand the lens at which I am conceptualizing my cases, it makes other things so much clearer, right?
Mhm.
And it prevents this like tail from wagging the dog situation.
Yeah.
And so, of course, in my supervision, my focus with my supervisees was also in walking through their case conceptualization of their clients, right? And
Hmm.
giving them similar frameworks and asking questions that would solicit some of that information when they're presenting cases to me. Um, but similarly, I think if I'm attuning to my supervisees and it would be hard to imagine someone like wouldn't be interested in conceptualizing their cases.
Hmm.
But, say I was like really into kind of grief and loss work and everything I was approaching was through the framework of grief as opposed to trauma or another framework. Um, and I had clients or I had supervisees that were like, this is not like, I'm not picking up what you're putting down.
Hmm.
I would pivot, right? I would pivot because it doesn't have to be through the framework of grief. It
Right.
doesn't have to be through, like, these are not requirements. These are just like anecdotes or things that I'm finding clinically meaningful right now
Hmm.
and am interested in sharing with the people I supervise.
Yeah. It is interesting because that can be hard sometimes because as
Yes.
you're learning something and you're really excited about something and it's like when you're hammer everything's a nail, like you start seeing everything through that lens.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
It's hard to be like, okay, no, you're okay. Yeah, let's look at this from this other lens. Absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
no problem. But
Mm-hmm.
if it's where your supervisees are, then
Mm-hmm.
makes sense to give them what they need, right?
Right. Again, if I'm supervising someone who's working at a crisis center and I want to be looking at things through the lens of grief and loss, it's applicable, but
Hmm.
it's not necessarily appropriate when you get to work with someone for 3 or 4 sessions over the
Right.
course of 10 days, right?
Hmm.
Like we're not really there to unpack, we're there to pack back up and send them out into the world so they can unpack with someone else.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Just I'm thinking about like if the point is stabilization
Yeah,
and
right,
you're
exactly.
like just like what else is in here? Let's dig in some more things and find out,
Right. Let's
oh,
like
look at
turn this
this. Did you
upside
know this
down.
was
Right.
here? Yeah,
Yeah. Right.
absolutely. And
Similarly, if stabilization is the priority, like we're not necessarily working on strengthening someone's ability to develop insight or doing insight oriented work. It's like
yeah.
we need to resource and move on.
Hmm.
And so as supervisor, that's partially my responsibility too, is
Hmm.
to check what I'm doing and make sure that it's congruent with what they need in their workspace.
Yeah. I end up talking with a lot of associate license, pre-license interns,
Yeah.
depending on your state, it's called all sorts
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
different things. I end up working with a lot of people at Abundance Practice Building, helping
Yeah.
them build their practices.
Sure.
And one of the things when they're allowed to have their own practice at that stage, I always say, like, find a supervisor that you admire, find a
Yeah.
supervisor that is doing the kind of work that you're like, God, if I could be like that as a clinician, I'd feel so good about myself.
Hmm.
Um, and I just am realizing I never say find a supervisor that has your exact niche. And you're
No.
proving to me that that is a good thing that I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
Like I think as an eating disorder therapist, I know that there are so many like you can step in shit so easily as an eating disorder therapist. That I think it is good to have supervision with somebody who knows enough about eating
Yeah.
disorders to know where those like
100%.
potholes are. But that doesn't mean they have to specialize. Or I don't know, what's your opinion on having two supervisors? How's that
I think
work?
it's great. Again,
Okay.
I think if we're clear on the intention and like the function, again, I think about folks that, like, to your point about eating disorders, or again, we've got in at least my scope or my community, we've got really clear pathways for folks that have eating disorders or struggled with disordered eating, folks that are autistic, and folks that have addiction and substance use issues, right?
Mhm.
And those all require really specialized training. And so if I am a therapist and my background is working with autistic folks, but I'm interested in maybe branching out, it would make sense for me to be working with multiple supervisors. It
Hmm.
also makes sense for a lot of people who are in agency settings or who are in school settings or in large system settings that are considering private practice. to have more than one supervisor, right?
Mhm.
Because we've got a supervisor for my full-time gig or for my large system, and then I've got a supervisor for this caseload I'm building on the side, because I don't necessarily want to recreate my job at community and mental health in my private practice.
Yes. Yes. Please don't do that. You'll be so
Which is
sad.
it's so easy to do, right?
It
But
is.
I need mentorship in a different capacity.
Mhm.
And that's often where I find a lot of folks that join kind of group supervision spaces or group consultation spaces, they might have a primary supervisor outside of that space and use this as supplemental supervision or like different perspectives. So again, I if you're choosing wisely, I don't see why it would be a conflict.
Okay. Got it. It's not like having two primary therapists, which will
Right.
mess your mind
Right.
up.
It will mess your mind up, right? But
Mhm.
no, I think, again, if you have the capacity for it, if it makes sense for you, if you have a very specific niche but are looking to branch out into something else, like, sure, it makes sense if you find the right people.
Mhm. Anything else around being a supervisor that you want to make sure you communicate?
Yeah, I don't think it has to be as scary as people build it up to be.
Mhm.
Right. I think there's so much fear, which we haven't really talked about today. There's so much fear around liability in being a supervisor
Mhm.
that can be mitigated with really good documentation,
Yeah.
right? And one of my practices, again, administratively, that we didn't talk about is every time I meet with someone for supervision, I type up like a full supervision note. I send it to them. They co-sign on that note. I talk about what clients we've discussed and what interventions are recommended and what additional resources are offered. And while that feels like a little bit of extra work that's not necessarily like required, it also protects me and it protects them. It
Mhm.
honors that people have multiple learning styles. It's again something I wish that my supervisors had done for me so that I
Yeah.
could reference back to previous notes. But if you're doing just like in regular casework or regular therapy, like if as long as you're following the regulations and the legislation in your state under your license, you're not at any more risk than anyone else in offering supervision.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about that great supervisor and like it was in that same form.
Yeah,
Like she would take it from me. It was all paper. This was like back before EHRs. It's like
right.
20 years ago. And she like the last page was her like filling that out essentially as we were talking.
Hmm.
And then she would make a copy of it for me and she'd
Hmm.
put some in
Hmm.
her file and I would have a copy too. And just
Right.
like as somebody who does look back at notes, especially like right before I see that client again, to be able to
Totally.
review that was really valuable.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yay. Thank you, Anne. This is so great.
my
I really
pleasure.
appreciate it. And
Yeah.
I know that like your love for supervision is so apparent. Every time you talk about it, you're lit up and you're
Yeah.
just, you have so many good things to say. So I appreciate your time and energy today. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
I hope that broadened your clinical horizons. Head over to notboringces.com to get your CE credit. Want to have a not boring conversation with me about your clinical area of expertise? You can apply there too. If you like this conversation, leave us a 5-star review, tell a friend, and be sure to subscribe for future conversations.